We have a very special keynote today, but I want to introduce first our Chair of Justice and Witness Ministry team, Elizabeth Durant, and she's going to introduce our speaker. So Elizabeth, thank you for being here, and thank you for opening up our time together.
Thank you, Adam. It's my great honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Randy Woodley as our keynote this afternoon. His presence among us is meaningful to me as an individual, but also for us as a conference. Last year, we passed a resolution to honor the sovereignty of the First Nations. And so as we're faithful to our resolutions, we're also grateful to welcome Dr. Randy Woodley as our keynote this afternoon. He is an activist scholar, a distinguished speaker, a teacher, and a wisdom keeper who addresses a variety of issues about culture, faith and spirituality, justice, race, regenerative farming, and our relationship with the earth and indigenous realities. Dr. Woodley currently serves as Distinguished Professor of Faith and Culture and Director of Intercultural and Indigenous Studies at George Fox University, Portland Seminary. His expertise has been sought in national venues such as Time Magazine, Huffington Post, and Christianity Today. He is the author of several books, including a wonderful children's book that my family recommends, and most recently, Decolonizing Evangelicalism. And he co-hosts a podcast with Bo Sanders. And I will put links to the things I just mentioned, into our chat window in just a moment. Randy was raised near Detroit, Michigan, and is a legal descendant of the United Kiowa Band of Cherokee Indians in Oklahoma. Dr. Woodley and his wife, Edith, have been innovators and activists for over 3 decades, with 4 grown children and 5 grandchildren. And the Woodleys are co-sustainers of Elohe, Indigenous Center for Earth Justice, a regenerative teaching center and farm in Yamhill, Oregon. So one of my treasured memories is of a time in my first call at Portland First, when I took the youth group out to Elohe. Randy welcomed the youth who were wondering, it was like my first activity with them. So they were like, what, you're taking us into the wild. But Randy welcomed us in, and he sat the kids down and he asked them, tell me what you know about colonization. And they did. And then he started telling stories about the racism that he and Edith and their family and co-organizers had survived, and the ways that they resisted, and their persistence in continuing to nurture and grow the next generation of Indigenous leaders. And so after the stories, then we went outside on this gorgeous fall day, and the kids played with the cats in the barn, and they worked on the farm, and they learned how to make apple cider. And so the teaching of colonization was grounded in the doing of being on the farm, and the learning came in and through the body. And as a brand new pastor, I got to experience a way of learning that was authentic and embodied and joyful. Struggle, yes, but so much joy. So it is with great honor and excitement that I welcome Dr. Randy Woodley. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. It's wonderful to be here with you all today. I was dancing too. I saw some of you said that you can't see me, but you're dancing, but it's hard for me to hear that song without dancing. In case you don't know who they are, it's Redbone, the first Native American band to really hit the big time. So, they're coming out with a book in October, I think, about Redbone. So any of you rock and roll aficionados, there you go. So I'm going to be sharing today at a time when it's apropos. If you're in probably any place in Oregon or Washington, you've suffered from smoke inhalation, particulate matter. You may have been removed from your home, evacuated because of wildfires. The wildfires, COVID-19, and a lot of what's going on right now in downtown Portland today. There's a big rally of basically white supremacists, and they're coming from all over the country to support them. So this is good timing. So I'm going to talk today not about the effects as much as sort of the cause, if I can. I want to get to the root of things And so I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation with you because you definitely don't want to be looking at me for the next 45, 50 minutes. So, so I'm going to go ahead now and share my PowerPoint. And let's begin to talk about how this all came to be, at least from my perspective. So get it in view, and there we go. So this is just the stuff that Liz mentioned. Here's some of my books, and you can. Somebody has this title page in case you need it to come back up again. You're welcome to go ahead and take a picture of it or copy it or something like that. But today I've been given a big task as we talked about where your group is right now, and the statements you've made, and the resolutions and things like this, and also the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery. Excuse me. It sort of came up to be this: racism, land tenure, and climate change in Oregon. And welcome to the Euro-Patricene, and I'll explain that as we go along. There's a quote by James Baldwin that I love. I think it explains American history as well as anything. It says, American history is longer, larger, more various, more beautiful, and more terrible than anything anyone has ever said about it. And by the way, the picture that you're seeing is a computer reconstruction, a reimagination of a archaeological site of a village called Tellico. It's a Cherokee village in East Tennessee. And it's now underwater from the Tennessee Valley Authority. But this was one of my third great-grandfather's villages. A little perspective. For the most part, contemporary historians have proceeded from the presumption that modern people are different from and superior to those who came before, especially those designated as primitives. Distortions and incomplete and even dishonest renderings of the past are found in many modern accounts of ancient peoples and contemporary primitive peoples. These accounts serve to reinforce the sense of difference and to distance moderns from unflattering legacies of the past. And this is a quote from John Mohawk, probably my favorite Native author. And the bottom is just a little humor. So for more than 5 centuries, the doctrine of discovery and the international laws based on it have legalized the theft of land. And I know you know this because you dealt with the doctrines of discovery, but I'm reminding you how this is related. With the theft of land, labor, and resources from indigenous peoples across the world, and systematically denied their human rights. The doctrine of discovery originated with the Christian church and was based in Christian scripture, including the Great Commission, the divine mandate to rule based on Romans 13, and the narrative of a covenantal people justified in taking possession of land described in the Exodus story. And this is written by Father Bartolome de las Casas, just trying to chronicle what he saw happening in the quote-unquote New World. As for the vast mainland, which is 10 times larger than all Spain, we are sure that our Spaniards, with their cruel and abominable acts, have devastated the land and exterminated the rational people who fully inhabited it. We can estimate very surely and truthfully that in 40 years that have passed with the infernal actions of the Christians, there have been unjustly slain more than 12 million men, women, and children. In truth, I believe, without trying to deceive myself, that the number of the slain is more like 15 million. The number is not that important. A lot of people. The fact that he attributes that to Christians is. John Kennedy said, for a subject worked and reworked so often in novels, motion pictures, and television, American Indians remain probably the least understood and most misunderstood Americans of us all. Collectively, their history is our history and should be part of our shared and remembered heritage. When we forget great contributors to our American history, when we neglect the heroic past of the American Indian, we thereby weaken our own heritage. We need to remember the heritage of our forefathers founded here and from which they borrowed liberally. So what was it like? You can't understand what happened until you understand what was really going on what we call Turtle Island. So we have lots of sort of ancient ruins that you can take a look at and say, oh, there's something happening here. And usually it's like the one place, and they don't tell you, like, for example, Cahokia in East St. Louis, that there were actually hundreds of Cahokias, but they hold that up as sort of the one, as if we could only do that one time. So here we have, based on archaeological evidence, a realistic picture of what things may have looked like. Welcome to 1491. So there was actually something happening here. Our native people were not, half naked and hiding behind trees necessarily. We know the doctrine of discovery. We know that that was given, that Christians were given the right to assume dominion over indigenous peoples of all the lands marked out, but they were already inhabited by millions of people. How many? Depending on who you read, but credible estimates estimate between 100 and 160 million in North America, and probably about 25 million in what we call the contiguous United States. You can see that in just a little over 100 years, about 90 to 95% of those people are lost. And at the lowest point in history, only about 250,000 Native Americans in the United States. So what happened? The first thing that happened was weather, and I think this is really a warning, and why we're talking about climate change also is that climate concerns are probably some of the biggest that we need to be aware of. They cause usually the most widespread damage. So in about a 150-year period, approximately 1125 to 1275 AD, America experienced several super droughts. Super droughts are sort of a period of like 4, 5, 6, 7 kind of years of drought in a row. Some estimate that there was as high as a 50% population loss in the Americas. And we know it did drastic damage, because this is when all of our large cities and places began to be abandoned. Chaco Canyon, Cahokia, Okmulgee, Effigy Mounds, Gila Cliff Dwellings, Chichen Itza, all of these sort of empty out at that time, because they realized that without water, you can't have that many people living together. A lesson that we would probably need to learn again today. So many of these civilizations were at their height at that time. And basically when widespread famine occurred, they emptied out. So that was the first wave of destruction. And this would be, you remember, it's 1492 when Columbus gets lost in the Caribbean. So just a short time before that. Second wave was disease. As much as 95% of the Indians died almost immediately on contact with various European diseases, particularly smallpox. That would have amounted to 1/5 of the world's total population at the time, a level of destruction unequaled before or since. These plagues wreaked havoc on traditional Indian societies, the savages, as they called us. Most of the colonists saw, without ever realizing it, were usually the traumatized, destitute survivors of ancient and intricate civilizations that had collapsed almost overnight. In the end, the loss was incalculable. So that's the second wave, disease. And a lot of times this happened before a person ever saw a white man. Then the third destructive wave was, of course, genocide, ethnocide and genocide. And that sort of trumpet of genocide starts from Columbus and is still being played today, depending on what tune they play. But we still have lots of policies that are meant for us to go away. Our job as Native people is to disappear. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Our nation was born in genocide. We were perhaps the only nation which tried as a matter of national policy to wipe out its indigenous population. Moreover, we elevated that tragic experience into a noble crusade. Indeed, even today, we have not permitted ourselves to reject or feel remorse for this shameful episode." a lot was lost. So we know about all these ancient societies, Greece, China, Egypt, etc. But we don't know about ancient Native America. We don't know about the microagriculture and macro environmental management. We don't know about sustainable architecture. We don't know about the humanities. We don't know about the sciences. We know a little, like, oh, the number 0, and but do we know that there was brain surgery and dentistry and all of these things going on? Urban planning, democratic governments, education systems, intercontinental economic trade, complex peacemaking strategies. All of these things were happening before a white man ever set foot in the Americas. In a lot of ways, life here was much more healthy and definitely much more tolerant of diversity than in Europe. Native peoples utilized thousands of medicines and drugs, of which the basis of many of today's modern medicines are based. A lot of it has been lost as well, but today at least 500 medicines and herbal remedies are used, like aspirin, quinine, petroleum jelly, etc. There are great places like Poverty Point, which had the largest, most elaborate earthworks in the Western Hemisphere. It's on the United Nations World Heritage Site. This is in northern Louisiana. Places like Cahokia, where many of you have heard about in all of East St. Louis was actually mounds, large mounds, but they were raised when they built St. Louis. And there were, like I said, there were hundreds of Cahokias in the area that we would call today the mound building cultures. Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, an engineering miracle. In about 1115, at least 75 outlying cities had been built within 30,000 square miles, composing agricultural communities, trading posts, ceremonial sites, etc. Connected by a central canyon to one another by 6 major Chacoan roads. These roads extended to another 60 roads. They were well researched and surveyed, and generally straight routes lit up at night with signal fires. And as almost every ancient native site, there was also an astrological observatory. In the Sonoran Desert, about 2000 BCE, the Holcomb people, today's Pima Papago people, engineered a complex series of canals and weirs and irrigation networks with remarkable genius, rivaling sophistication of those used in the ancient Near East, Egypt, China, etc. 500 miles of canals irrigated 110,000 acres in the desert. Food production produced this advanced irrigation system is to believe to have supported up to 80,000 people. The highest population density in the prehistoric Southwest. So what about our Northwest native cultures? So there was no need for our cultures in the Northwest to build elaborate urban centers or complex canal structures. Their complex systems of clans and societies is considered ingenious. Their art is unique from all others. And the coastal tribes supported the most dense population of any other area in North America. This was the breadbasket, if you will, for North America. It's estimated that in 1491, the Pacific West supported over 1/3 of the indigenous populations in the Americas. If correct, that could mean between 20 and 60 million people. A 6,000-year-old record shows that up until the past 2 centuries, the indigenous peoples of the Northwest never suffered from drought conditions. Theirs were societies of abundance, not need. %60 of the world's foods are from the Native Americas. You know, if you like tamales and most of your Mexican food, it comes from indigenous peoples. All corn is Indian corn. We had over 5,000 varieties. Irish potatoes are really Indian potatoes, over 3,000 varieties. Rubber, chewing gum, tapioca, sweet potatoes, etc. Rubber, crampons. The dream catchers on your mirrors influence, and there is a book, a great book called Dream Catchers. Philip, and I can't remember his last name right now, but that book will talk about the influence of Native America. I just want to, again, if there's any rock and roll aficionados out there, or really any American music aficionados, there's a video documentary you need to see called Rumble. That's how Native Americans invented rock and roll. So with all this influence, but no recognition of such, I teach American history and American church history, and I always begin with something called, America Before Columbus. And people ask the same question every time. Why didn't I know about this? Why didn't I learn about this? And I always answer the same way. You weren't supposed to know. You're not supposed to know that the people were not just human, but civilized, quote unquote, in their own civilization with their own inventions and their own philosophies, etc., before you came here, because that doesn't justify what happened. What happened? Violent theft of land, armed removal and relocation, forced breakup of families, outlawing indigenous religion, bureaucratic policies of assimilation and racism, ecological absorption. And here we have, this is like the Oregon Land Claims Act, right? Indian land for sale. So what happens to continue this march of the doctrine of discovery? Some of you may know about the Johnson versus McIntosh, which is really the case that codified this in U.S. law. It was being assumed before, but the United States always needs a rationale or a justification for what it does. And so in this case, they basically call on the right of the doctrine of discovery to solve the case, and it becomes a cornerstone of U.S. Indian policy and property law today. And this begins all the way from Washington forward. Here's a letter from Jefferson. This unfortunate race, whom we've been taking so much pains to save and civilize, have by their expected desertion and ferocious barbarities justified extermination, and now await our decision on their fate. So you see both friends of the natives, says one native author, and those hostile to indigenous people conceptualize the issues of colonization and European encroachment on indigenous territories in terms of a problem of the natives. The natives were, according to this view, to blame for not accepting the terms of their colonization. The belief in the indigenous problem is still present in the Western psyche. To just get an idea of sort of the flavor around Johnson versus McIntosh of what was happening, Henry Clay, who's known as a statesman, there was never a full-blooded Indian that ever took to civilization. It's not in their nature. They are a race destined for extinction. I do not think that they are worth preserving. They're inferior to the Anglo-Saxon race, which is now quickly replacing them on this continent. They're not an improvable breed, and their disappearance from the human family will be no great loss to the world. In point of fact, they're rapidly disappearing. And if government should take proper action, in 50 years from this time, there will not be any of them left. I think they did take proper action, but we're still here. This affected greatly the tribes who were in the East, and especially as it came up in 1830 for Andrew Jackson's removal plan. And they allowed then this principle of discovery to extend to all native law. And then basically that's why Jackson wouldn't uphold the decision for the Cherokees to be able to stay on their land, and had a removal of all the tribes in the East, or at least attempted that. It would be no surprise to hear Jackson's words. They have neither the intelligence, nor the industry, nor the moral habits, nor the desire for improvement to change their condition, and basically must yield to a superior race. So again, it continues to be used, this doctrine of discovery, and basically stops the United States from its obligation from keeping its treaties. Where it's real interesting, again, timing is everything, right? The Oneidas sue the city of Sherrill in New York, and basically it goes to the Supreme Court, and their case is rejected. They were buying up land, and since it would be Indian land, they were trying not to be taxed on it. It was rejected. It was cited and codified as doctrine of discovery law, and that opinion was read by none other than Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who said, "The tribe precluded from rekindling embers of sovereignty that long ago grew cold." In other words, they were forced off their land, and now that they had the ability to buy it back, they could not be exempt from the doctrine of discovery still. A Powhatan chief said so long ago, "Why do you take by force that which we would gladly give in love?" And according to almost all accounts, not all, but almost every account, Native people first welcomed whites and believed that this was a place that could be shared. And yet you see some pictures of Standing Rock here where they took our elders, threw their eagle feather bonnets on the ground, got the dogs after them, put them in cages, and put numbers on their arms. All of that was not done by necessity, but to humiliate them, to teach them, you don't do this in the United States. The Native nations have appealed to the United Nations and UNDRIP, as some people call it, the rights of indigenous people, and were recognized because we couldn't get any justice from the United States. First, it's rejected by the U.S. and it's some of its main partners, and then finally they sign on. Quoting Kennedy again, "Our treatment of Indians still affects the national conscience. It seems a basic requirement to study it. The history of our Indian people, only through this study can we as a nation do what must be done if our treatment of the American Indian is not to be marked down for all times as a national disgrace." This just quickly to let you know that we had, this is not the first Elahe that we have now. This is the third. The first, we had 50 acres, successful schools in Kentucky, and we were chased out by a group of white supremacists, paramilitary folks with a 50 caliber machine gun, and we lost everything at that point. You can see one of our schools up here in the right-hand side, and then this is a welcome ceremony we did for all the international students. This is myself on the left and Richard Twist on the drum, my son dancing, and my youngest son who's 21 and just got married last weekend, and my wife holding the camera there. So yeah, we were doing what we thought was our job to do in the world, and we lost everything, and fear of our life, and we're still a threat, I guess, no matter where we go. Fortunately, we ended up in Yamhill, Oregon, where I hope we're safe. There's no guarantee, but I believe this is where we have been fortunate enough to find a place and create the new Elahe. So our mission is this: simply to live in harmony with the land using North American traditional indigenous knowledge, wisdom, and practices as a guiding model. We've created a center that embodies educating holistically. Elahe Indigenous Center for Earth Justice, Elahe Farm and Seeds, focused on developing, implementing, and teaching sustainable regenerative earth practices. While there's an identifiable farm within almost 10 acres of Yamhill, the whole property is considered vital to the farm. And as part of the farm, we seek to be a model of regenerative agricultural, animal husbandry, and wild tending systems that support human needs while improving the earth and all creation inhabiting the web of life. That's our long statement. So let's look more about this particular area here. I can't go to everybody's area. Oh, I would really love to talk more about Central Oregon and my wife's people, the Shoshone, because I know that history very well and exactly what happened over there. But because right now we're in the Willamette, and probably most of you are in the Willamette, I'm just going to mention very quickly what happened here. We basically have the core discovery, and then we have the fur folks that come out. There's a high competition. The plan at this point, as the core discovery, is to promote this disposition to exchange lands, which they have to spare and we want for necessaries. Necessaries are small items, trinkets, which we have to spare and they want. We shall push our trading uses and be glad to see the good and influential individuals among them run in debt, because we observe that when these debts get beyond what the individuals can pay, they become willing to lop them off by cessions of land. In this way, our settlements will gradually circumscribe and approach the Indians, and they will in time either incorporate with us as citizens of the United States or move beyond the Mississippi. The former is certainly the termination of their history, most happy for themselves. This is President Jefferson to William Henry Harrison, February 27th, 1803. So basically, they were the first loan sharks. This is a native land, sort of how it was carved up, and then what's left of it. The only thing I would correct is where it says Northern Paiute and then Shoshone, that bottom quarter, and that's incorrect. Really, that whole area was both Northern Paiute and Shoshone lands mixed. We are on the land right now of the Kalapuya people. I live on the land of the Yamal and the Tuolumne bands of the Kalapuyans. This was a rich place, a wonderful place. There's a lot written about how beautiful the Willamette is, and that's why people came on the Oregon Trail. And what I want you to know is that, and I've researched all this, I've done all the original research out at Champoody and other places to find what was really happening here. But Fort George was built in 1811, and later Fort Vancouver in 24, comprised mostly of French Indian, Mohawk Métis. My wife's seventh great grandfather was the leader of that group of 25 Mohawks. English, Scottish, Irish, French, French Canadian, Hawaiian, and Americans. They were fur traders, voyagers, mountain men. They all were married to women from local Indian tribes. There were no white women out here at that time. Those included Nez Perce, Blackfeet, Shoshone, Spokane, Flathead, Clatsop, Nehalem, Chinook, Kalapuyan, etc. And they were Protestant, Catholic, various indigenous and Hawaiian faiths, and some with no religious adherence. So there was a lot of diversity here as this state began. And that's quite unique because that's the founding of this state and of what people call sometimes the Portland is the whitest city in the United States. It's interesting to know that that's not how it began. So there was apparently great relationships between the Kalapuyan people and the outsiders, and we have some of their journals and things that talk about that. Mutual marriage, attending each other's ceremonies, working for one another, etc., to get things done. Real community happening. At Fort Vancouver in 1824, you could have at least 20 different Indian languages, as well as Hawaiian, French, English, and Chinook Wawa as the trade jargon. Baptismal records at Fort Vancouver show many Native American tribes, including Chinook, Cayuse, Clatsop, Nisqually, Chehalis, Kalapuyan, Cowlitz, Okanagan, Pondere, Klickitat, and Hawaiian, Awahi, meaning these were mixed marriages with men from European descent and later between each other. So the ethnic backgrounds of the 145 documented freemen who were employed by the Northwest Company, Northwest Fur Company, and the Hudson's Bay Company for the Snake Country expeditions between 1818 and 1845 were 40% French Canadian, 25% Iroquois, 17 Métis, 8% Western Indians, 5% Eastern Indians, and 4% Americans. The first settler in the Willamette Valley, I've traced to be a man named Jean-Baptiste Deporté Mackay. And this is out in the French Prairie. If you're going towards Champoody, you may know that Mackay Road that goes out to the highway. He had 7 native wives and was said to be a great guy. He owned both sides of the river. He operated the ferry where the organic farms are now. But yeah, he's not recorded as the first settler in the valley. He's not given much space at all in Oregon's history because he's a mixed blood native who had 7 native wives, and that I guess doesn't make for a great founding father. The Champoody Treaty negotiations are really the result of rounding up all the natives in Oregon and putting them in the Grand Round Reservation. Then later they were broken up and sent to other places. Basically, what you have here is the United States treaty negotiators saying, no, you can't stay, and the natives saying, yes, we want to stay. And here again, as is the practice, you get them on a reservation, you starve them, they start to die of disease, and then they say, we might as well fight our way back home and die in our own land. Currently, the Portland metro area is the 11th largest Native American community in the United States. Most people don't realize that. Approximately 45,000 Native Americans in the Portland metro area, about 25,000 in the greater Salem-Keizer area, and then about 5,500 at Grand Round. So this is like surrounding Newburgh, Champoeg, where life began here. It's something most people don't realize. In Multnomah County, a study called Making the Invisible Visible showed that these statistics were abysmal compared to those of whites. About half the income, poverty rates about triple that of whites. Single mothers raising children were 79.1%. Unemployment, 70% higher than whites. Over half the Native students don't graduate from high school. The rate of incarceration is almost double that of whites. 20 times more children in foster care, because whatever you can do to get an Indian child out of that Indian home is still sort of like the rule. Native American teen birth rates, 27 per 1,000, is double than that of whites. Infant mortality, double. And yet, things are changing. In 2013, half of all the children born in the United States were Black, Indigenous people of color. 2042, over 50% of the people in the United States will be Black, Indigenous people of color. The white-only population will continue to decline, eventually become the most recognizable and fastest declining minority in the United States. And that's always a problem. When the minority has control of everything, you get sort of a South African apartheid situation. But today, Portland, along with Seattle, leads the nation in mixed race population, 7% compared to 3% nationally. So let's look at what climate change has to do with white supremacy. They say this is the age of the Anthropocene. Someone else has called it the Eurocene. I call it the Euro-Patricene. Quoting Vandana Shiva, the parochial roots of science and patriarchy, and in particular class and subculture, have been concealed behind the claim to universality and can be seen only through other traditions of women and non-Western peoples. It is these subjugated traditions that are revealing how modern science is gendered, how it is specific to the needs and impulses of the dominant Western culture, and how ecological destruction and nature's exploitation are inherent to its logic. It is becoming increasingly clear that scientific neutrality has been a reflection of ideology, not history, and science is similar to all other socially constructed categories. My understanding of our role as human beings is to maintain harmony and balance. We have the privilege of co-sustaining all of creation with the Creator and the earth, and all creation contributing. Our Cherokee word for this is called Elohe. In the Genesis story, human beings are created last, not to rule, as we've been told for so long, but to fill the need to co-sustain, not as the crown of glory, but as the only creatures uniquely equipped to co-sustain the rest of creation. It's about a responsibility, not privilege. Not over the land, but serving and preserving God's creation. To be a co-sustainer in the community of creation is then foundationally what it means to be human. In the Western worldview, the nature of the relationship with the land has changed over time, as has the relationship between farmers and food workers, and I didn't include any of that. That's a whole nother situation. The goal is cheap food. Symptoms of the crisis are short-term profiteering, global distancing, and American value of convenience. But what I do want you to note is that the corollary between how we treat how European Americans treat creation and how people are treated, especially BIPOC people, but especially women, has striking similarities. We want to control both land and women, to objectify both land and women, to exploit both land and women, the land and women both to serve at one's pleasure, to expect production from both land and women. And we live in a rape culture of both land and women. And I would say this is all resulting from a deranged Western worldview. So I want you to think with me about a place as I name this going on. Think about this. There's deforestation happening. Topsoil is being depleted. Oceans and bays are polluted and fished out. Rivers and streams are undrinkable. Air pollution makes breathing unhealthy. Disease kills tens of thousands of people. Large mammals are going extinct. Classism reigns via gender, wealth, and race. Cities are overcrowded. Majority of people are living in poverty. Corruption and greed run rampant. Injustice is the norm except for the top 1%. Hunger, disease, war, and economic depression are all present. Now, where is that place? If you said it was Western Europe in the late Middle Ages at the time of discovery, you would be absolutely correct. That's exactly what was going on at that time. And I can get into details more later if someone would like to think about why that was. But it's that same worldview that was brought to the Americas. And now that worldview that basically put Europe at the place where it had to become empire because it exploited all its own resources. Now it's taken a place as large as North America and is it bringing it to the same place where it is utilizing all its resources. It's extracting all its wealth and we have to go other places in order to maintain our empire. I would say the Western worldview is a failed experiment. And in 500 years of the Western worldview has not done the earth or the world much good. It was a European elite that developed a distinctively mechanistic view of matter, an oppositional relationship to nature, and an economic system indebted to geographical expansion. The resulting political orders measured success by how much wealth could be generated in the exploitation of peoples and resources. The geological record bears the mark of this European assemblage of hierarchies. Understanding the forces of Europeanization, the forces of racial superiority, economic hegemony, and global resettlement is essential to understanding how the planet got to this point. I want you to take a picture of that screen if you would. This may be the most important thing to realize today. If we think about how power has been used and how it's currently being used, this is a chart someone made, and I'm just going to leave it up for a second for you to take a look at. This is the logic of white supremacy. And I would just add to this that the line is actually becoming lowered, that more and more white supremacy is becoming overt and socially acceptable. Or I say the line is getting higher. Chief Seattle said, every part of this soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove has been hollowed by some sad or happy event in days long vanished. Even the rocks, which seem to be dumb and dead as the swelter in the sun along the silent shore, thrill with the memories of stirring events connected with the lives of my people. And the very dust upon which you now stand responds more lovingly to their footsteps than yours, because it is rich with the blood of our ancestors, and their bare feet are conscious to its sympathetic touch. Now, what I don't think Chief Seattle was saying is Native people are better than white people. What I think he was saying is we see things differently, especially when it comes to the earth. And now, systems have been created. They're ubiquitous now to teach us to forget how to live with creation. Our topsoil is disappearing. Our forests are shrinking. Desertification is advancing. Coral reefs are dying. Sea levels are rising. Wildfires, flooding, tornadoes, hurricanes, heat waves, all on the increase and becoming more severe. New diseases are being released, like COVID-19, AIDS, Ebola, bird flu, swine flu, all as a result of climate change. and non-indigenous people's worldview. But our people have lived here for at least 28,000 years without endangering the land. What's missing from a Western worldview? All creation is sacred. In a Western Enlightenment-bound worldview, human beings are categorized apart from creation. The result is a false dichotomy between the physical, earth body, and the ethereal, mind and spirit. Theologically, this is a bad material world with potentially good spiritual people who are just aliens and visitors. In an indigenous harmony worldview, all creation is understood as fully physical and fully spiritual. Healing, therefore, by definition, considers the healing of people, healing our histories, and healing of all creation. And we can gather from Jesus, and we can say more about this later. He says, don't swear by heaven, that's God's throne, don't swear by earth. So in other words, it's God's footstool. Everything is sacred. And I'll just have you note that what words we have of Jesus, whatever you consider to be authentic, were not pre-Enlightenment bound words. Charles Eastman, the attending physician at the Wounded Knee Massacre, helped to start the YMCA, started the Order of the Arrow with the Boy Scouts. He was a doctor and graduated from Boston University, a Dakota man. Said, long before I ever heard of Christ or saw a white man, I learned from an untutored woman the essence of morality. With the help of dear nature herself, she taught me things simple and of mighty import. I knew God. I perceived what goodness is. I saw and I loved what is really beautiful. Civilization has not taught me anything better. So indigenous people don't own creation. We don't have a patent on nature. Creation is there for everyone to enjoy and to be inspired by, to be taught by. But any culture who spends their lives in the outdoors learns to respect and live with creation. So I would hope that everyone would develop a sense of similar respect, because we're all indigenous from somewhere. Love this verse of scripture in Job. Ask the animals, they'll teach you. The birds of the air, they'll tell you. Speak to the earth, it will teach you. Or let the fish of the sea inform you. Which of these does not know the hand of the Lord has done this? It's in his hand, and it's the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. Again, Chief Seattle, humankind is not woven the web of life, but we are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. So, as indigenous people, our people have been watching the Western Europeans, European Americans for 500 plus years. To indigenous peoples, the problems of a Western worldview are obvious. The way of life demonstrated by the Western peoples leads to alienation from the earth, from others, and from all creation. It creates a false bubble called the Western civilization, which the West feels is superior to all others and will protect them from future calamity. This false hope is built on age-old philosophical ideas handed down from Greece, Rome, England, and other nation states. A critical understanding necessary to correct a dualistic Western worldview. For millennia, the whole of creation has been producing enough energy to allow humans limited consumption. We're just tertiary consumers. Humanity in the Euro-Patricene has accelerated consumption exponentially. Grandmother Earth is now trying to rebalance the overuse through random acts of nature. She's reclaiming lost territory, spitting out the inhabitants in order to restore harmony. The top of the food chain is now the earth herself, and this would make for a wonderful horror story, wouldn't it? You can see, I'll just let you look at these. This is my apples to apples comparison of a Western worldview compared to an indigenous worldview. I don't have time to get into all of these. I'm just going to talk very briefly about the dualism. All of this is introductory as I bring these three subjects together. Let me talk about dualism, which I consider to be the foundational fallacy. To invest, it's the Platonic dualism, to invest in the ethereal, the mental, the spiritual, the metaphysical, the abstract realm to a higher degree than the physical. Our thoughts, our philosophies, our theologies all become disembodied. The physical, like the land, the good works, our bodies, all become suspect. The products of the mind are held higher than personhood and community. Laws, documents, doctrines, rules, etc., weigh heavier than people. It creates binary thinking so that things are either right or wrong, either legal or illegal, heaven or hell, success or failure, civilized or primitive, introvert, extrovert, good or bad, saved or lost, clean or dirty. With some weeds are weeds and some weeds are plants, or some plants are weeds, I guess we'd say, which most of those are medicines. Animals can be animals, but varmints are varmints, you know, all these crazy classifications and binaries. And make it difficult for Western thinkers to hold two seemingly incompatible things in tension without having to find a resolution, and which also creates a false assumption that all things of the mind may be understood and every problem may be solved. And that goes all the way back to Plato. The path it takes over 500 years, ancient Greco-Roman civilizations, the Anglo-Saxon myth, the doctrines of discovery, genocide, forced removal of Native Americans or land theft, attitudes concerning black chattel slavery, laws operating during Jim Crow, residual racism in the 20th and 21st century, school to prison pipeline, mascots, caricatures, cartoons, and just the privilege of indifference, which is probably the biggest killer of them all. This is what normalized American notions of freedom and power look like to at least 40% of America. So hundreds of nations suffered a similar fate. America's genocide against Native Americans was planned and calculated like those of Hitler and Stalin. The perceived problem with Indians was because they held land others wanted, lands Christians wanted, lands now exclusive to churches, educational institutions, neighborhoods, etc. Yet it was considered by the natives to be the creator's land. Regardless, tens of millions were murdered and imprisoned for it. All the land that we're on, and I think you've realized this in your repudiation of doctrine or discovery, and all the land that forebearers are on, if you're not a United States citizen, you're a direct beneficiary of this genocide, structural racism, and theft. And it should affect our spirituality, which means it should affect what we do. So I'm going to go through some first steps and in the next 5 minutes or so, and then we're going to have a discussion. So as one of my friends says, as in any recovery from a debilitating social culture problem, the journey begins with, hello, my name is, and I have a problem. I am proposing that Aboriginal culture, worldview, frame of reference, and in this case, Aboriginal Christianity offers hope to Western people. Aboriginal people are not your problem. We're your cure. Racism in our day is most often expressed by allowing unjust systems to remain unchallenged and to become indifferent to the injustice resulting from those unchallenged systems. Injustice is deadly for some and not others. Solidarity must be actionable. We are your friends, your peers. You're not my great white father. You are my lost white brother. I have something to say to you. I have information you need. I have gifts that will make you complete, just like it is with you. I need you. I need what you have to offer. I need the gifts our Creator put in you. Just don't lord it over me. I'm your peer. I'm your peer, even though I don't think like you. One day you will get it. You will finally be my brother. We are the conscience of your technology. We are the humanizers of your institutions. We matter quite apart from your recognition of our worth. We are a threat to entrenched powers that be who refuse to open the doors of opportunity and choice to all. So it follows that the antidote will be found in decolonization. To be consciously anti-genocidal, one must be actively anti-imperialist. To be in any way an apologist for colonialism or neocolonialism is to be an active proponent of theft and genocide. How do we get there? We deconstruct, It's awkward, it's uncomfortable, it's painful. We got to be vulnerable. And yet there's much to gain as well. Friendship, security, confidence, trust. So construction sites are messy. Taken from the Dictionary of Scripture and Ethics, reparation is the enduring effort to make compensation for what has been taken. Acts of reparation are unambiguous and should have a direct relationship to the offense. If land has been stolen, then land plus other compensation should be given to the offended party in order to compensate for the loss of capital in the land. The weight of making reparations is on the offender. The choice of how to use the restitution is up to the offended. So this is my little paradigm. If you want to take a picture of that, you're welcome to. This is what I consider to be a sort of a basic full picture of how do we go about this. There has to be awareness, an education process led by Indigenous people in their own comfort zones and paid well. Second, lament. Confession in the public square, speaking the truth to power, allowing time for sensibility to sink in. And I know that I think these first two steps, you guys are actually on the wheel. So I'm really happy to hear that. Reparations, or what I call rehumanizing. Restitution first, then relationship building, justice initiatives, land initiatives, economic initiatives, etc. And then finally, what I call memorializing, working together in partnership to retell the history, to codify the markers, to do remythologizing, so that the next generations know, hey, this is something we dealt with, and this is how we dealt with it. Other steps: adaptability, no longer rigidness; intentionality, no longer passive; inclusive worship, no longer homogeneous; education by Black, Indigenous people of color, no longer just your comfort zone; exploring and embracing diversity narratives, no longer white myths; racially diverse leadership, sharing power, no longer tokenism; self-deprecating humor, no longer taking ourselves too seriously; embodied, empowered churches as centers of proactive change, no longer dualistic, or milquetoast as I call them, who say the right things but don't do anything. And there's a whole lot of things about, especially focusing on the earth here. If you look up The Fullness Thereof, Woodley, I did the cover article for Sojourners in 2019, May, and that's free online. There are things like the Green New Deal, Reimagine Police and Military, Equal Access to the Vote. That covers a whole lot of areas and different initiatives. Supporting local on alternative farming and food practices, reimagining urban areas for growing and developing cooperatives, innovative communities with equal access tables like Black and Indigenous farmers, reimagine churches with more reimagined open theologies, and supporting Indigenous efforts, people of color, and rights of Mother Earth and the whole creation. If we can enact the rights of Mother Earth laws, it would be the fastest way to save our place on the planet and trying to bring about harmony on Earth. The Shoshone elder said, "Do not begrudge the white man his presence on this land, though he doesn't know it yet. He has come to learn from us." And that takes us up to about 30 minutes of sharing, and I'm interested in having a conversation with you about all of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I get to be your conversation partner representing all of the folks who are out there. We will also, if folks want to speak on camera or by voice, you can raise your hand or let us know in the chats, and we can make that possible. We already have a couple questions in the Q&A. I saw one come up in the chat. So the one that came up first, and it was in the chat, this is from Ginger Redlinger, and she asks, how can churches use this information to change hearts and minds about our connection to each other and to the earth? Do you what are your thoughts about how we can go back and use this information?
Yeah. So I think the thing that I've been involved, my wife and I have been serving our Native people, and as sort of double agents, also, if you will, missionaries to the church for all these years, for over 30 years. And the thing that we see the white churches are not willing to do is reparations. Mm. And I don't think that until that can actually happen, that there's going to be a conversion to want to do these things. Nobody wants to do reparations. Nobody wants to talk about it because when we do, we're vulnerable. And especially the churches put themselves in the most vulnerable position. But to me, the Creator is the most vulnerable being who exists. And I think when we express our vulnerability as human beings, that we're the most spiritual we can be just by being human. And so I think that there's actually a conversion of power that takes place. It's, if you know the story of Jesus talking to the rich young ruler, and he obviously had exploited the poor. And he said, you got to sell, not just sell everything you have, but you got to give the money to the poor. That's how you become healed. That's how you become saved, so to speak. And so I think that's the missing link. And I think that's, to just be very blunt and very honest. I used to dance around this thing because it sounded like we're asking for something, but this is actually salvation for the churches to be involved in reparations work. Yeah.
Yeah. So somebody just chatted, Boise First is doing a reparation fund in our community. One of the ways I know that the United Church of Christ has made reparations. A lot of our people don't know that we, the descendants of missionaries in Hawaii, worked actively to overthrow Queen Lily in Hawaii, and that the troops who perpetrated that coup in Hawaii were stationed in the Congregational Church across the street from the palace. And Queen Lily was a Congregationalist and left the Congregational Church and became Episcopalian. I think in 2008, the Hawaii Conference made a declaration of confession to that, and then created a fund, took $2 million out of their endowment and created a fund specifically for Hawaiian people to educate themselves on their culture and to reclaim their language.
Yeah.
What are some ways
that's wonderful? Let me just comment on that if I can. I didn't know that this had been done. Queen Liliuokalani, of course, I knew a little bit about her history as a Christian, but not this congregational connection. But this is why, if you remember my paradigm, the memorializing is so important, so that people can see, hey, here's something active that's been done, and then that story gets told and re-mythologized, so that we have a different story that comes out now, rather than the sort of American myth that's been perpetuated. So I'm really glad to hear that. In all my years in serving our Native people, like I said, over 30 years, I've only seen 3 instances of reparations that I'm aware of. So,
So, and maybe this is our own work to do, and I shouldn't be asking you. And so, if that's true, just say so. But how would you recommend that, like, a local church begin this work of reparations?
Yeah. So I think they need local guides. People who sort of know the terrain and can help them figure out, like, hey, here's where you live, here's the people, and here's some of the options, of your giving and how you want to direct it. Or if it's not giving, maybe it's serving. Maybe there's other ways to do this, but to be at least to be able to come to the point where you can approach the people who you select and say, here's what we think we're able to do. What would you like us to do? And, so I think you need local guides to guide you through that process. Most people are so disconnected with the Native world, they don't know how that works, right?
Yeah,
and often will do more damage than good by sort of,
Yeah,
That's my best guess. Is we've thought about this on a national level, you know, and talked to other people, because there's a lot of churches that are being now abandoned and turned over and being sold, and you know, there's possibilities of giving that money to the land that it was stolen from, etc. So there's just a whole lot, but it can be quite complicated, and to find people who are familiar with the local areas and things is probably the best way to start.
yeah. Are you able to pull up the Q&A down at the bottom? There's a little box. There's 11 questions in there, and you might be able to help me look at them.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, the first question, do you want me to just go down the line, or?
Sure, and then you can answer the first question, and I'll look and see if there's some farther down that we want to highlight.
Okay. I definitely want to deal with the second question. That's, to me, one of the most important.
We'll start there.
Yeah. Okay. So could you say more about the rights of Mother Earth? Yeah. Ecuador, Bolivia, and a number of the other smaller nations have begun to create what we call Mother Earth rights, or the rights of Mother Earth, where the earth has the same rights as people, basically. And they're spelled out very well and articulate. And now some cities have begun to look at this, and I think Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania may be one of those cities. If we can create laws that protect Mother Earth and give her personhood, then I think that's the fastest way to stop climate change. You know, and this is why, you know, we've renamed ourselves Elohim Indigenous Center for Earth Justice. I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing what I can to basically secure a place for my grandchildren and the next generations to come along.
Yeah.
There is a couple websites. One of them is called Earth Rights, and another one may be called The Rights of Mother Earth. And if you just kind of put that in, you'll come up with people who are actively involved in that kind of legislation and lobbying and things. So
We've got folks behind the scenes who've been Googling stuff and putting it in the chat box whenever you mention it. So I'm sure someone will do that.
I'm not sure what Will's asking. Is there similarity between my critique and Marxist and liberation theology? Probably. There's a lot of similarities. Yeah. If you're seen outside the box, a lot of people see the same thing. Yeah.
Christina, who's our pastor of our church in Ashland, she says that some folks at her church have talked about reparations in the form of an annual rent paid to local indigenous programs. And is that something that you've heard of in other places? Is that?
Yeah, up in Seattle, they're doing that. There's a whole program set to take care of some of the tribes up there, where they actually pay so much rent a month. You know, some people, I think they pay what they can. I think it's maybe suggested like, you know, like, I don't know, $38 a month or something like that. I think it's a great idea. A friend of mine is involved in that initiative, but I don't know a lot about it right now. So.
And that's another opportunity also to connect with local organizations, right? Because you need to do some research, find out who are the local Native-led organizations that are doing work that you can pay rent to. And then my experience is that when I start giving to an organization, they put me on their mailing list, and then we start like learning about what's going on. And that can be, I like that in your circle, that the reparations then leads to the conversation that is more equal.
Yeah. So the 1990s UCC Faith Works, the native clergy speaker from Colorado, I'm guessing that's probably Tink Tinker, ended up saying that to address these issues, give back the land. The audience of man and white people were silent.
probably mostly white people.
Oh, okay. How can we start to do this, even some of the land the churches are on? Yeah. Again, the answer, there's no prescription that you can say, here's the prescription that everybody must do, except for you have to basically investigate, find a guide that can help you through it, and begin to work with local tribes and figure out what's sort of the best solution. What can you do as a group, and what do they need as a group, sort of a thing. So that's, and that's dealing, and there are tribes that are not, federally recognized whose land was taken too. Just because they're federally recognized doesn't mean they're not a valid entity. So, so for example, I think the Chief Seattle's tribe, the Duwamish up there, are not federally recognized, and yet this rent, I think, is going to them. They were, all it means to be federally recognized is that the United States had to deal with you. If they didn't have to deal with you, they didn't recognize you. And so now we have this sort of classification, but there are as many tribes that are not recognized as there are who are. And then there are lots of other Native groups doing all kinds of things, like ours in the Winona Ladukes, Honor the Earth, and the indigenous, the Native Indigenous group, I can't think of the name right now, but there's lots of places. Indigenous people have had a hard time for a long time. And if people would just sort of start looking around, I think we could do a lot more. The best thing is to empower our own people to do the things that we know how to do. What we really don't need is a lot of people who don't know our people and don't know our community coming and saying, here's what we think we should do for you, right? So it'd be better to empower our Native people who are already doing the things that they need to do, rather than sort of reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, always follow the lead of the people who are most affected, right? Always follow the lead of the, instead of, and I think that's one of the things that those of us who have been socialized as white have a hard time doing. We think that we have to be the leaders. We've been socialized for that.
Yeah. So one person asked, the concepts of reparations is more than economic. We have a spiritual debt as well. Yes, but I would say, economics is spiritual. Everything is spiritual if you understand it that way. So, but it's not, but I agree that it's not just the economic realm. There's, and relationship is something that sort of like is natural to Native people, but not so much as I've worked with white churches over the years. Very difficult. Programs are, everybody seems to be able to do programs, but building relationships seems to be a tough one. And I think that's part of the gift that we have to give back. So,
Julie Gorham asks how people can engage with you, and this might be a good opportunity for you to talk about. I know we heard from Liz at the beginning about how her church connected in with Elohe. This might be a good opportunity to talk about how folks can connect with Elohe, and maybe somebody can put in the chat. We did our best to pay Dr. Woodley what he was worth,
absolutely.
but we also would love for you to give directly to Elohe and to continue that project. And so someone can put in the chat a place where we can give directly to some of the things that you're doing out in Yamhill and that you're doing really across the country. So how can people connect with you outside of just this one presentation?
Yeah, there's a number of ways. Yeah, definitely. We need actually a lot of money right now. We've moved to a new place and we've started a farm from scratch. And currently, if anything gets done, it's just my wife and I doing it because of the COVID quarantine. And so the only other thing that gets done is if we can afford to hire people to come and do it, professionals. And we're not able to do that with a lot of things. So we just had to drill 2 wells. We raised funds and we paid for both of those. But we've got a lot of projects. We got to do a campground. We got to build a plank house. We're trying to build bunkhouses so for when we have our schools. And that's another way. We have schools that will be going on constantly. We have post-COVID. We have, right now we have one going online. It's a cohort for the next 8 months. That just filled up. With 18 people. But we will be having more cohorts in schools. Coming out and kind of like we do a trade-off with groups that want to come out, churches or groups of churches. You bring like Liz talked about with the youth, but you bring people for a particular job or you take on a project, and we'll spend several hours a day, talking and teaching and sharing and storytelling, and then the group spends 4 or 5 hours doing work, and seems to be a good exchange. People like that sort of thing, and so that's another thing. If you have a group that's quarantined together, you're welcome to come out and work and social distance from us. But we got lots to do. It's just that we can't kind of have the crowd right now. And so there's lots of ways. You can go to our website right now. We're gathering all of our teaching materials and everything to make those available to people, free video, audio, podcasts, etc. We do this podcast, one of my former students and I, Bo Sanders, every week, or almost every week, called Piecing It All Together, P-E-A-C-I-N-G. And, listen to what we have to say. I mean, read the books. And there's a number of Native authors right now who are beginning to write. Mark Charles and Soong-Chan Rah have written a good book on the doctrine of discovery called Unsettling Truths. Mm-hmm. This one called Decolonizing Evangelicalism that Bo and I just wrote is not just good for evangelicals. I think it's for any Christian. And invite us to to speak at your church, or invite us back. And our point is to get a message across. And I actually usually begin a conference by saying my goal here is to convert you from a Western worldview to a more indigenous worldview. Because it's only an indigenous worldview that I think is going to help us survive, us as a human species survive on Turtle Island here in the future. So,
yeah, I want to ask. So you said that all of us have indigenous ancestors from somewhere, and I think that that's something that we, particularly those of us who are stuck in the Euro-Patristic worldview, forget. Yeah. And I wonder, is there one? You've already done a little bit of this with your reading of creation story, but I think that we are closer to some of the indigenous ways of thinking in the Hebrew scriptures than we sometimes realize. And is there something, and I know that you wrote Decolonizing Evangelicalism and you teach at a Christian university, and so is there a particular story that from our sacred text that you might want to lift up and say, you can read this from read this through an indigenous lens. Stop reading it through a Euro-Patristic lens.
Yeah. Well, just about any story. But I do want to say that the book Shalom in the Community of Creation, an Indigenous Vision that I wrote is sort of that parallel between the Native Harmony way and the big picture Shalom. It would be sort of Walter Brueggemann's take on Shalom. That's what I did my doctoral dissertation on. So that would be good for that. But, if we're looking at scripture, Jesus is a great indigenous dude in terms of how he thought. He talked about, the things in creation and, flowers and fields and birds and trees and donkeys and fish and, all of these kinds of things. And it wasn't that there was no lack of modern inventions at that time. There was the chariot wheel and the chariot, and there was the crossbow, and there were, all of these kinds of things that every age has their inventiveness, but you don't hear him talking about those things so much. And I think that's sort of the first thing to realize.
Mm.
And the second thing is, Jesus understood his place as a Jew, bringing a message of freedom within the context of Judaism, and especially within that line of Judaism that celebrates what I call the Shalom Sabbath Jubilee construct, which is to bring the world, if you look at the Genesis story, in harmony and balance.
Mm.
That is the role of humanity. I can see that so clearly in the Genesis passages. So, and then the first 11 chapters of Genesis, those stories or those narratives are about, harmony being broken at every single level.
Mm.
And then Jesus, and then you have the prophets, who are calling, you got to take care of the what I call the holy triad, the sacred triad, the widows, the orphans, and the immigrants, because those are people in a patrilineal, patriarchal, closed system who can't take care of themselves, and so they get nothing. So you got to take care of the most vulnerable. And then you have the prophets calling them back. And then finally you have Jesus, and everything Jesus does points to that Shalom Sabbath construct, that understanding of Judaism and we would say our harmony way. And so when you get passages like let's just look at like Luke 15, which is one of my favorites. This is the story of of a shepherd who is an immigrant, because foreigner, because at that time, Jeremias tells us that most of the shepherds at the time were foreigners, and there's also other proofs of that. And so we have this, when Jesus says to the Pharisees, hey, what if you had 100 sheep? That's not a compliment, right? And then we know that the widow was the one that lost the coins, that a widow could have 10 drachma across the front of her face, right? And that's what she used as her dowry to borrow against and to get things done, and she loses 1/10 of her possessions, and so we know this is a widow. And then finally the story of the orphan, the guy who makes himself an orphan, the guy who commentators say that when you ask for your father's inheritance before you're allowed to have it, the community elders come to you and they break a pot in front of you and they say, this is what will happen to you if you don't leave and never come back. And so it's extreme cases. And Jesus is telling the Pharisees, because the context of this is Luke 15:1 and 2, where it says the Pharisees began to grumble and complain because Jesus received sinners and even ate with them. And so he tells this long story, and he tells them a story about a foreigner, and he tells them, think of yourself as a foreigner, but they can't relate to that. Think of yourself as a widow, and they can't relate to that. And think of yourself as this orphan who made himself an orphan. Mm-hmm. And so they can't see themselves in any of those things. But then he tells them about this loving father, this incredible loving father who I think is the most precious verse in scripture, where it says, and when he saw his son a long way off, he ran to him, right? This is probably our greatest picture of God in the scriptures. He ran to him and he put a robe on him and he kissed him and put a ring on, and he made a party. And the Pharisees are probably at this point thinking, maybe I could be that loving father. I don't think he deserves it, but maybe I could be that loving father, right? This is how they're interpreting the law. And then Jesus reminds them, there's another brother, remember? And he's outside the party, and he won't come in, and he won't accept the rest of the people, just like they won't accept the people that Jesus is sitting at table with. And by so they are breaking the laws of Judaism to accept the widow, the orphan, and the immigrant. And so, when you begin to understand Jesus in light of this harmony way ethic or the Shalom Sabbath Jubilee ethic, you understand all of Scripture differently. You understand that it's all about how we make room for others and use our power to empower others. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, we have a question about how do we burst our bubble in our worship services? And this might also be an opportunity to talk about maybe about cultural appropriation tokenism in our worship services, and maybe how you do it as well.
Yeah. So, you said it and I said it, we're all indigenous from somewhere. My suspicion is that the church has a long history of imperialism and hegemony, and all of those different indigenous peoples along the way that were taken up by Christianity. Probably, I'm guessing they weren't as pagan as and idolatrous as they imagined. And the reason I guess that is because that's exactly how they demonized our people. And I know that wasn't true for us as well. So obviously all people's cultures have truth. And I think one of the ways is for people to begin to explore their own indigeneity and create ceremonies. That's one thing. And if, I think when it gets close to cultural appropriation, then that's when you need to ask the experts, whoever those experts are, and just say, are we messing up here? Are we going too far? Are we, what do we do here? But I think when we begin to express those ceremonies in our worship, and when we can express that spirituality, that is a tangible way to express our spirituality. And this is what's needed to fill the gap of that dualism, to both in ceremony and story, in myth, and in actions, like justice actions and other things, taking care of the poor, etc. So I think anything we can do to get us out of here and get our heart flowing out into the congregations and out into the communities is a positive step. However, that and you got to begin somewhere. There's a great book by one of my favorite books by Paulo Freire, and who wrote Pedagogy of the Press, and Miles Horton from the Highlander School, and the book's just called "We Make the Road by Walking." That's so true. You gotta start walking, or you can say there's a road, but until you start walking on it, it's just a road.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I've had to learn is when someone says ouch, to say, oh, I'm sorry, and then do better.
That's right. One of the things that I notice that white folks are really afraid to mess up in front of, Black, Indigenous people of color, right? But to me, and so now I have, good-hearted, white liberal friends who are, are like, we don't want that burden to be on you. We're going to educate our own people. And I'm like, I don't want you educating your own people because you don't know the stuff, man. The burden's on me, the burden's on our people of color. It's a heavy burden. We keep doing it, and we keep getting frustrated. But the thing is, it's like, when a Native person talks to you about genocide, it's different than when a white person talks to you about genocide. When a Native person talks to you about reparations, it's different. There's a power dynamic, again, that there's a conversion process. It's like all of a sudden now I'm in a position where they are the expert. And that's not an easy position for some white people to get in, to be vulnerable. But again, our vulnerability is what really, I think, makes us human and makes us spiritual, and makes us most, if you will, Christ-like.
I want to thank you, Randy, for being willing to be that educator. It's not easy, and it's not everybody's call, right? Like, I can tell you that as a gay man, I have lots of gay friends who don't want to be an educator, right? And that's a task that I took on, that I said, I am willing to be that person. And Christina, our pastor from Ashland, commented earlier when I was watching the comments. I can't right now while we're talking, but that it takes emotional energy to be able to read those quotes that you read about the genocide, and that it requires something of you. And so I want to thank you for being willing to stand up and be an educator, and for accepting that part of your call. And I know your call is a lot bigger than that. There's a lot of other things that you're called to, but thank you for that part of your call.
Thank you. I appreciate, Tyler, you recognizing that. Yeah, I guess it takes one to know one, right? So, yeah, it's just, it is a calling. I actually believe it is a calling, and maybe I was born with the personality to be able to do it. And hopefully I'm doing it better now than I did 10 years ago. So,
Yeah. So unfortunately, we have run out of time. And
thank you all so much for inviting me. And I do let me know how we can continue the relationship. That was one of the questions. We are available.